apartments in the building. One of those apartments was home to a gay couple, and the other to a woman living alone. He attacked both of them, hurting them badly. The building's security quickly evacuated everyone, and we were all rushed outside for safety. But here's the terrifying part. Anyone living above the third floor, including us, was told we couldn't leave. They didn't want the criminal to get away or harm anyone else. Later, I found out that he managed to escape through the back gate of the building and ran off. But by then it was too late. The damage had already been done. I still can't stop thinking about what could have happened if I had just told my mom right away. Maybe I could have stopped him before he hurt anyone. Maybe those attacks wouldn't have happened if I hadn't let him in. I often find myself blaming myself, thinking I'm the reason all of this went down. If I had just done things differently, maybe everything would have turned out fine. The guilt still haunts me. It's one of those moments that you can never undo, no matter how badly you wish you could. And I'll never stop wondering, what if I hadn't let him in? What if I had told my mom immediately? Would those people still be safe today? When I was a toddler, I had a moment that still sticks in my mom's memory, and honestly, mine too. It was a regular morning, and everything seemed to be going fine. My mom was getting ready for work, and I was being my usual self, content and calm. But the moment she tried to walk out the door, something strange happened. Suddenly, I became completely inconsolable. My mother says I gripped her clothes with all my might, wrapped my little legs tightly around her, and screamed at the top of my lungs, "No, don't go." It was like a switch had flipped in me and nothing would calm me down. No matter what my mom tried, I wouldn't let go. My siblings tried to entertain me to distract me, but nothing worked. I was determined to stop her from leaving. At that time, being a single mother of 6 kids in the 1960s was no easy task. My mom had mouths to feed and bills to pay, so she couldn't afford to miss work. But I wouldn't give up. She did everything she could to get me to stop crying, but it was all in vain. Finally, out of desperation, she called her workplace and explained the situation, telling them that I had suddenly become very sick and was too unwell for her to leave. About 5 minutes after hanging up the phone, and with me still in her arms, something completely unexpected happened. I suddenly stopped wiggling and squirming. I looked up at her and said in the sweetest voice, "I love you, Mama. You can go to work now. Bye." Just like that, I was completely fine, as if nothing had ever happened. My mom, stunned by the sudden change, could only stare at me for a moment. She shrugged it off, thinking I was just being a toddler with strange moods, and decided to go ahead and leave for work. Little did she know, the story wasn't over yet. On her way to work, my mother had to make a few detours, as it was always a hectic drive. But as she was nearing the usual spot on the freeway where she would have been at that exact time, she noticed something that made her heart drop. There, in the very spot she would have been, was one of the worst car pileups of that time. It was a massive accident, involving numerous cars, and tragically many people were injured or killed. The scene was chaotic and devastating, and it was clear that my mom had narrowly avoided being caught up in it. That's when it hit her. In that moment, she realized that something had happened with me that delayed her just enough to save her life. As strange as it sounded, I had somehow kept her from being in that spot at the wrong time. My little tantrum, the sudden change in my behavior, and my insistence that she stay home, it all happened for a reason. I had unknowingly delayed her just enough to avoid a terrible fate. From that day forward, my mom never looked at things the same way. She became even more protective and aware of the strange ways life could sometimes work. While it might have seemed like a regular dramatic tantrum from a toddler, it was as if something, or someone, was looking out for her. She was grateful for that little delay, and I think it made her appreciate the moments with us kids even more. And whenever she retells the story, it's clear that the bond between us was stronger than just mother and child. It was something more. Growing up, my parents and I loved camping. I'm an only child, so every time we went camping, I always got my own tent. I was about 14 years old at the time. I'm 26 now, but I still vividly remember the experience. We lived in Maine, and if you've ever been there, you know how vast and dense the woods are. It felt like there was an endless stretch of forest surrounding us, and that made every camping trip an adventure. But there was one particular night that stands out more than any other. It was around 1 in the morning, and I was lying in my tent, wide awake. I thought I couldn't sleep, but in hindsight I wonder if something was keeping me from it. The air was still, and the woods around us were eerily quiet. My tent wasn't fully zipped, one of those cheap tents where air didn't circulate very well, so I left it a little open for ventilation. That's when I heard it. The sound of a car pulling up. Something that seemed completely out of place in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't see much from where I was lying, but I could make out the shape of a white Ford vehicle. I didn't recognize the car, and I didn't know why someone would be out there so late, especially in the woods. A man stepped out of the car. It was hard to make out his face. The light from the car wasn't strong enough, and the shadows from the trees made everything feel more unsettling. He didn't seem to notice that I was awake. He walked up to my tent. My heart was pounding in my chest. I was frozen, unsure what to do. But right then, I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up to bright sunlight filtering through the trees. I was disoriented, and my parents were already packing up the campsite. They were getting everything ready to leave, and I hadn't even realized that I had fallen asleep again after hearing the man. I didn't tell my parents about the man I had seen, because I assumed it was some kind of strange dream. We drove to the local supermarket that day. Our flashlights had died the night before, so we needed to buy new batteries. While we were there, I picked up the local newspaper. I was just casually flipping through it when my eyes landed on a headline that stopped me cold. The story read something like this: Breaking, boy gone missing, suspected kidnapping in North Maine woods. I felt a chill run through me. The article described a boy who had gone missing in the woods near our campsite. The area they were talking about was incredibly close to where we had camped, maybe only 15 feet away from where my tent had been set up. I couldn't believe what I was reading. It described the boy's disappearance as a suspected kidnapping, and the authorities were still investigating the case. The more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that night. The car I heard, the man who walked up to my tent, it all seemed like too much of a coincidence. I don't know if I was just too scared to confront the situation back then, or if I somehow blocked it out. But looking back, it feels like I narrowly avoided being caught up in something much bigger than me. The memory still haunts me. I never found out what exactly happened to that boy, but it's something that still makes me uneasy every time I think about it. I wonder, sometimes, if there's a reason I woke up when I did. Could it have been a warning? Could I have been in danger too? I'll never know for sure, but it's one of those experiences that'll stay with me forever. His story takes place around 2009 to 2010, during a pretty chaotic time in my life, so I can't recall the exact date. For a bit of context, this all happened in the Albertville, Boaz area in Alabama, where I wasn't originally from. I had a good friend, let's call him George, who, along with his family, took me in when I was about 18 and still figuring things out. George and his wife, who we'll call Kelly, were part of a local paranormal investigation group, which I joined since I'd always been interested in that kind of thing. Kelly had a stepson, let's call him Jim, who was around my age, and we hit it off immediately. Kelly also ran a newspaper route on Saturday nights, which Jim and I sometimes took over. One Friday night, with no investigations planned, Jim and I decided to do the paper route together. We left the house around 10:30 or 11 p.m., drove to Sardis and began our route. Started in Boaz, took us through some back. The night was going smoothly. We were cruising along and just having a great time. Around 1:15 or 1:30 a.m., we reached a particularly dark, remote area along the route where the two towns meet. We turned to a road to a dead end where we had a few deliveries to make. We turned down the music, drove down the gravel road, a few houses surrounded by thick woods. As we were placing the last papers in a mailbox, we heard a deep, guttural shriek coming from the woods behind us. Jim asked if I'd heard it too, and just as I confirmed, we heard it again. Closer this time, as if whatever it was had moved to the edge of the woods just 100 yards away. At that point, Jim decided we were finished there and started driving off. But as we picked up speed, we heard the same unsettling noise once again, this time right behind us. I looked over at Jim, only to realize he was staring out the window beside me, not at me. When I followed his gaze, I saw it, a dark shape running alongside us. It was so black that it seemed to absorb all the light around it, silhouetted even against the night. It looked somewhat like a large wildcat, but with a tattered look, like something with shredded, shadowy fur. There were no visible legs, but it was moving incredibly fast. As we approached a stop sign where the gravel road met a paved one, Jim slowed down slightly, and the creature pulled slightly ahead of us. Just as we reached the sign, it seemed to leap effortlessly over it, and as it did, it turned its head toward us, revealing a single, large, fiery, orange-red eye that burned through the darkness. As we came to a full stop, it darted off to the right, letting out one final, chilling shriek into the night. Fortunately, our route took us left, and we finished the rest of our deliveries in record time, getting back at 8 a.m. usual. And to wake George we'd seen, he was already on the porch, almost as if he'd been waiting. He looked like he was about to say something, but stopped when he saw our faces, asking what was wrong instead. I told him everything, and he started asking for details. What time it happened, the exact location, and so on. After giving him everything we could remember, he took a deep breath, looked at Jim. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but something terrible happened to him earlier this morning. Rick was a former group, someone I hadn't met because he'd left the group a year joined. It turned out that during their time with his partner, who we'll call Lisa, had gotten involved with some really dark stuff, experimenting with things that were strictly off limits for everyone else. They'd had a lot of strange and troubling experiences because of it, which ultimately caused them to leave the group and even put strain on their relationship. Earlier that night, around 1 a.m., Rick had gone over to Lisa's place, hoping to convince her to take him back. According to Lisa, he was acting erratically, but at times would seem eerily focused. After an hour of him refusing to leave and causing a scene, Lisa told him she'd called for help, hoping it would make him go. She said he got very quiet, and after a few moments of silence, she assumed he'd left. Help arrived around 1:30 a.m., but when Lisa, she found Rick had passed away there on the porch. As it happens, was along the same road where our gravel road met the paved one, about 2 miles to the right. The direction that dark figure had headed when it left us, believed that Rick hadn't fully distanced himself from those dark practices, and that what we'd seen was some kind of entity arriving to collect on whatever debts he'd left behind. I've had a few strange experiences in my life, but this one remains one of the most unforgettable. In 1999, I was installing one of my children's museum exhibits in Staten Island, and they put me up on the campus, which had been an old U.S. Navy retirement village compound called Sailor's Snug Harbor, if I recall. Every day for 2 weeks, I took the ferry over from Manhattan, staring at the Twin Towers and thinking, maybe I'll visit this weekend if I finish in time. Anyway, I was given the use of a retired admiral rank house, a standalone brick Georgian, circa 1835. The large campus had several civic buildings for the residents, the library, a grand hall, parade grounds, and of course a large hospital and graveyard. After all, this was the final call for our men in blue. During my stay, an independent film crew needed several exterior shots. A carriage arriving and leaving, actor getting in and out, walking towards my house, etc., so they had rented it for the day. My museum day was just as long as a film crew day, 12 to 18 hours. So as I was leaving in the early morning, the PAs were just coming in to set up the location. I'm a movie props maker, but had to stick to my own lane. When I got home that night, the film crew gone. In and out like they promised, I was $100 richer, despite it not being my house at all. The location manager said that I was a ghost. Days man expecting any my stay be. I'm sure for a higher location fee when they hear who the actors are going to be. A recent 007 Bond villain. The company PAs left a small amount of production, a partially full trash bag, those short little water bottles that hold maybe 2 big swallows, sitting here and there all around the house, barely half a swallow taken out. The discarded twist cap sitting nearby, and a bunch of big The crew might have had food inside. In any case, the front open most of the day. I got the impression they had been recording dialogue in the house. Read a line, take a sip of water, read more lines, ask for another bottle, sort of thing. Tired as I was, the noisome noise of 2 or 3 B-52-sized flies in the bedroom was keeping me awake. They seemed to be drinking from the open bottles when I turned on the lights, so I got up and put the lids on the 4 or 5 that had been left in the bed. Then I opened the window facing the street light and turned off the bedroom lights. A few minutes later, I shut the window and went to bed in silence, only to be awakened sometime in the middle of the night by the sounds of the washing machine going through a cycle down in the basement. You know, agitate, stop, empty, spin, rinse, fill, repeat, etc. I went down. The deal was ancient basement. It had a finished floor, but barely, dangling bare bulbs, psycho-style, and 2 ordinary-looking laundry machines. A washer and dryer hooked up with modern fittings. I opened the lid, and to my amazement, the washer drum was full to the top with that sand just like you find all over New York State when you pop a shovel in the ground. I went back upstairs to get ready for work and saw one big dead housefly. It's back inside one of the bottles I sealed. It felt creepy. One night, my uncle decided to stop by his favorite local bar after a long week of work. It was one of those dimly lit, cozy places where the bartender knew most of the regulars by name and even remembered their usual order. My uncle wasn't particularly looking for company. He just wanted a drink and a bit of time to unwind. But as he sat down at the bar, a man beside him struck up a conversation. The man seemed genuinely friendly and easygoing. He was well-spoken, charming in a subtle way, and had an easy smile that made my uncle feel at ease. They started talking about everything and anything that crossed their minds, from the weather to the latest sports scores, and even a little bit about their lives. My uncle remembered thinking it was unusual to feel that comfortable with a complete stranger, especially in a bar. But something about this man made him feel relaxed. Over the next few weeks, they bumped into each other again at the bar a few more times. Each time they would chat, sometimes for hours, sharing stories, laughing at jokes, and occasionally opening up about life's struggles and dreams. My uncle didn't learn too much personal information about him. The guy was somewhat private, but he figured everyone has their boundaries. Still, my uncle grew to genuinely like him. In fact, he even mentioned the man to a couple of family members, describing him as a really nice guy he'd been chatting with at the bar. Then, one evening, my uncle went to the bar, hoping to see his friend and catch up. But the man wasn't there. My uncle shrugged it off, thinking he probably had other plans that night. But as weeks went by, and then months, he noticed that he hadn't seen his friend in quite a while. He asked the bartender about him, but nobody seemed to know much about where the man had gone. Maybe he'd moved to another city or found a new favorite bar, my uncle thought. Life moved, and the memory of his friend became just one of those casual encounters that drift away with time. Months later, life back normal, and my uncle hadn't thought about his old bar friend for quite a while. Then, one day, he received a letter from the courthouse summoning him for jury duty. He didn't shove it, as it was a typical civic duty that most people got called to at some point. He marked his calendar and, on the schedule, showed up at the courthouse, expecting the usual process. Wait around, and possibly sit through a mundane case or two. However, as he entered the courtroom and took his seat, he noticed that the attorney tense, feel a strange energy, sense of heaviness. Curious to a fellow potential juror and whispered, "Do you know what this case is about?" Him looked at him with wide eyes and muttered, "It's a big one. It's for a suspected." My uncle's he part of something this serious. Trying to shake off the nerves, he sat up straight, focusing on the case that was about to unfold. Then, as the court session began, the doors opened, and the accused was escorted into the room by security. My uncle turned to see the man being led into the courtroom and felt his breath catch. It was his friend from the bar. For a moment, he couldn't process what he was seeing. He stared in shock, trying to reconcile the friendly face he knew with the gravity of the accusations that hung over the courtroom. How could it be the same person? The man who had laughed with him, shared stories with him, and seemed so normal, so nice, was now standing accused of unthinkable crimes. As the trial began, the details of the case were laid out in excruciating detail. My uncle sat in disbelief as he listened to the charges, the evidence, and the accounts of people who had crossed paths with this man in much darker circumstances. Bit by bit, the image of his friendly bar acquaintance was replaced with a stranger, a figure capable of acts that went beyond anything he could have ever imagined. The experience left him shaken to his core. Even after the trial was over and he went back to his normal routine, the memory lingered. How could someone he thought he knew, someone he'd shared drinks and stories with, turn out to be hiding such a dark, sinister side? To this day, my uncle talks about it only occasionally, almost as if speaking about it too often would make it feel too real. But when he does, there's a strange look in his eyes, a mix of disbelief and something close to sadness. It serves as a reminder that sometimes we really have no idea who the people around us truly are. The invitation came in the form of a small, worn-out envelope, with my name scrawled across it in a handwriting that seemed oddly unfamiliar, yet somehow comforting. It had been over a decade since I'd last heard anything from my cousin's family, and we'd only spoken briefly a few times by phone. So when I received this unexpected invitation to a dinner at his home, I was surprised, even a bit hesitant. I'd never met my cousin face-to-face before, and all I had was a vague memory of my mother mentioning them from time to time, always with a hint of mystery. The address was peculiar. My GPS couldn't recognize it, displaying an error whenever I tried to load directions. Reluctantly, I resorted to pinning the location on an old map, and after a quick glance, I realized it was well off any route I'd ever taken, situated somewhere in the more remote countryside. Still, the better of me. I packed my things, got in my car, and set out as twilight began to stretch across the sky. As I drove, the surroundings gradually began to change. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by the dense cover of trees that arched over the road, their dark branches crisscrossing in an almost sinister canopy. I passed endless rows of empty fields, the occasional rundown barn, and not a single house in sight. The sense of isolation crept up on me, making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I glanced at my phone, still no signal. The silence of the countryside was unnerving, broken only by the soft hum of my car's engine. "Where the hell am I going?" I muttered, casting a wary glance around. But I pressed on, hoping the dinner would be worth this eerie detour. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spotted an address that closely matched the one on the invitation. The house itself was a grim spectacle, almost hidden by the trees and undergrowth that had opened. Moss clung to its sides, and thick vines wove across the crumbling walls. It looked like no one had lived there in years. "This can't be it," I whispered, feeling a strange dread settle over me. Still, as soon as I turned into the driveway, two figures emerged from the dimly lit front porch. They were smiling, waving me over. My aunt and uncle. Despite the unsettling state of the house, they seemed delighted to see me, rushing over to greet me with warm hugs, as though we'd known each other for years. Come in," they said, ushering me inside before I could ask any questions. The interior was surprisingly inviting, if a bit worn and outdated. I could smell something delicious wafting from the kitchen, pot roast maybe, and my stomach rumbled. My aunt had gone all out, setting up the dining room with platters of food and old family photo albums on display, one yellowed and dusty. And as we waited for my cousin, who they said had run a few errands, we chatted about family, catching up on years' worth of stories. They asked me about my mom, how she was doing, and reminisced about memories I didn't even know they had shared. At times, their knowledge of family details seemed odd, as though they had been watching from afar all these years. I was put off, but chalked it up to the excitement of reconnecting. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant, and my aunt's cooking was incredible. We ate until I was stuffed, and afterward they suggested a game of Uno, pulling out an old, worn deck from the shelf. We played for hours, entering, and as the sky darkened outside, I realized just how isolated we truly were. There wasn't a sound beyond the walls. No distant hum of cars, no animals, just a dense silence that seemed to press in on the house. Eventually, I checked my watch. It was nearing 9 p.m. My cousin still hadn't returned. I felt a creeping discomfort and decided it was time to head back. I politely told them I had to leave, explaining that I had work the next morning. The moment I said it, their expressions changed. My aunt gave me an almost pitying look. "You're not planning on driving back now, are you? It's dark, and these roads are tricky even in daylight." My uncle chimed in, looking visibly uneasy. "Stay the night. We have the guest room all made up for you. It's much safer." The insistence in their voices was unsettling, as if there was something they weren't telling me. I forced a smile and assured them that I could navigate my way back just fine, brushing off their worried glances. But when I stood up, they blocked my way, both of them now with pleading expressions. "Please," my aunt whispered. "You don't know what's out there. It's not safe to leave now." A strange chill ran down my spine, and a sense of urgency flared within me. I couldn't explain it, but something felt off. These people, though polite and familiar, seemed almost desperate to keep me there. It was as if they had been waiting for something. Waiting for me. With a tight smile, I nodded and pretended to relent. "Fine, I'll stay," I said, watching their expressions soften with relief. But as soon as they went to fetch the bedding, I darted out the front door, slipping quietly into my car and starting the engine. The wheels crunched over the gravel as I tore out of the driveway, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The house, with its dark windows and shadowed corners, disappeared quickly in my rearview mirror, swallowed up by the night. Driving out of that desolate area was just as difficult as getting there. I was lost for what felt like hours, retracing routes, narrowly avoiding trees that loomed like shadowy figures on either side of the narrow road. At last, a familiar road sign appeared, and I sped up, feeling a wave of relief as I finally left that dreadful place behind. By the time I arrived home, it was well past 11 p.m. Not wanting to wake my parents, I climbed over the fence and slipped in through the back door, careful to make as little noise as possible. But as soon as I stepped into the kitchen, I froze. The lights were on, and there was my mom, sitting at the table, arms crossed and a deeply concerned expression on her face. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I blinked, confused. "I was at Aunt Deborah's house. You knew this. They invited me for dinner." Her face paled. "Aunt Deborah called hours ago," she whispered. "She said you never showed up." I stood there, staring at her, my mind racing. My aunt had called? But I had just spent the entire evening with her and my uncle. I had eaten their food, sat at their table, laughed and played games in their old creaky house. And yet, an icy chill crept over me as I replayed the night's events in my mind, the unsettling details surfacing now with sharp clarity. The strange address, the dilapidated house, my cousin who never showed up, and my aunt and uncle's insistence that I stay the night. Till this day, I never knew who I visited. It was a rainy Saturday night. I was out in a restaurant with some friends having a great time. It was almost midnight and we had to leave. We came out, said our goodbyes, and I walked towards my car. I got in and started driving towards my home. I had a long day and was really tired. It was about an hour's drive to my house. On my way, I started to feel sleepy, so I turned on the radio to keep me awake. But there was some problem with the radio. All I could hear was static. I was checking the radio when suddenly I saw someone standing straight ahead in the middle of the road. I severed left and applied the brakes hard. The car screeched to a stop. I got out of the car to check, but there was no one there. I looked around where I saw the person standing, but there was no one to be seen around. No person, no tire marks, no indication that anything happened. I thought that my mind was playing tricks on me. I was just really sleepy. I went back to my car, checked the car. Everything seemed to be working except the radio. I was a little shaky after that incident and went on to drive slowly towards my home. I reached home at 1 a.m. Just as I got in, my phone rang. It was Andy, one of the friends with whom I was having dinner earlier tonight. He sounded worried, and he said that he was calling to check that I reached home safely or not. I told him that I was okay and asked what the matter was. He sounded confused and scared. He told that while driving home on the way he saw a guy who looked just like me standing there in the middle of the road. He thought that he had hit me with his car, but when he went out to see, there was no one there. That was very weird. I said that even I experienced the same thing. He said that he had called the other two friends too, and even they saw something similar. He started to panic. I told him not to think about it too much right now and just go to bed. We'll figure this out tomorrow. After the call, I took a nice hot shower and then went to bed. Next morning, the four of us had decided to meet at the same restaurant and discuss the events of last night. I reached there early, only to see that the restaurant had been burned down to the ground. The entire place had just been completely destroyed by the fire. There were paramedics and firemen checking for any survivors and trying to get the dead bodies out. I saw an onlooker standing at the side or the road and went up to him to ask what had happened there. He told that there was a fire last night, a big one. No one survived. All the people were trapped inside the building. No one could call the fire department as all the phone lines were destroyed. The fire engines and the paramedics came in the morning when everyone was already dead. I felt that was very strange, as we had just had dinner there last night. I went towards the road to wait for my friends. As I was going, I saw one of the paramedics taking a dead body out. It was charred, but somehow the face looked familiar. I looked closer and then I remembered where I had seen him. I was talking to him a couple minutes ago. I turned back to see, but he was gone. I started freaking out, thinking that, did I really see a ghost? The paramedic placed the dead body next to another one. Coincidentally, it also looked familiar. To my surprise, this was the person who I had seen last night, the one I thought that I almost hit with my car. But from his wounds, it looked like he had died there in the fire too. My head was starting to spin. What was going on? It was as if suddenly I was seeing ghosts everywhere. By this time, my friend Andy reached there too and was shocked to see the place burned down. "How is that even possible?" he said. "We were almost the last ones out of here and the owner said that they had to close the place." "Yeah, I know. It is all very weird. This place burning down and me suddenly seeing ghosts everywhere." "What ghosts?" Andy asked. I told him about the dead bodies lying there and how I had seen the same guy last night and then today morning too. "That is strange," Andy said. I did not see any ghost, but I remember seeing you last night in front of my car." Just as he spoke those words, I saw the paramedics carry out 4 more bodies: Andy, me, and our 2 other friends. All 4 were burned. I looked at Andy, then at my burned and lifeless body, being carried away right in front of my eyes. The house was blanketed in silence, an uneasy calm settling thing. My husband had left a while ago, just to pick up a few things he'd forgotten, and I'd been waiting for him to come back. I'd tried to distract myself, reading on the couch, but the ticking of the clock seemed louder than usual, filling the empty space. I kept glancing at the door, hoping he'd return soon. He was taking longer than I expected. Then, just as I began to nod off, a noise jolted me awake. A faint rustling outside the door. I held my breath, listening. It was so quiet I could have dismissed it as the wind, but there it was again, a subtle scratching sound, like someone or something was fumbling with the lock. My pulse quickened. I told myself it was probably nothing, that I was being paranoid. But as I sat up, the sound grew louder, now unmistakably deliberate, as though someone was testing the lock, pushing against it, trying to get in. Fear prickled up my spine, and without thinking, I darted into the bedroom and slipped into the closet, pulling the door almost closed, but leaving a tiny crack to see through. I crouched low, willing my breath to steady, listening for any movement. And then, just as I huddled into the shadows, I felt an arm wrap around my shoulders, a firm, familiar grip that pulled me back. I almost screamed, but then relief flooded over me. It was my husband. He must have come in quietly, heard the same noises I had, and slipped into the closet to hide with me. I leaned into him, heart still pounding, but now with the comfort of his presence. His arm stayed around me, his hand warm and steady on my shoulder, offering silent reassurance. We crouched there together, side by side, listening. The front door creaked open. Someone had come inside. The soft thud of footsteps filled the house, slow and measured, as if the intruder was in no rush, taking their time with each step. My husband's arm tightened around me, grounding me as the footsteps moved through the rooms, approaching the hallway, drawing closer to our hiding place. I held my breath, every nerve on edge, straining to hear every movement. I could feel my husband's steady presence behind me, his hand gripping mine now, a silent promise that we'd get through this together. But the footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. The doorknob turned, and the door swung open with a low creak. My husband's grip on my hand grew firmer, anchoring me as we stayed as still as possible, hoping the intruder wouldn't notice us. Silence stretched out, thick and tense, before a familiar voice suddenly broke it. "Hey, babe, I'm back. I forgot my keys." It was my husband's voice, calling out cheerfully from the front door. The world seemed to tilt. My body went rigid, my blood freezing in my veins. My husband was outside. He had just come home. If he was at the door, then who was in the closet with me? A wave of dread crashed over me, a sickening realization twisting in my stomach. I felt the weight of the arm still around my shoulders, warm and solid, the hand still gripping mine, fingers intertwined with mine as if nothing were wrong. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, but fear kept me rooted in place, my body locked in terror. Slowly, carefully, I pulled my hand away, my skin crawling as I felt the grip loosen, allowing my hand to slip free. I could barely breathe, my mind racing, heart pounding as I tried to process the horror of what was happening. Outside, I could hear my husband's footsteps, his voice calling out again, growing louder as he made his way down the hall. "Babe, are you here?" I stumbled forward, almost falling out of the closet, gasping for air as I rushed toward my husband, my body shaking with terror. He caught me, his eyes widening in confusion and concern as he steadied me. I was trembling. Without saying a word, I pointed to the closet. He opened it, but to my surprise, there was nobody inside. This story took place several years ago in a remote region outside the United States. I'll keep the exact location vague for privacy reasons. My name is Ella, and what happened that night started as a simple hiking trip with my close friend, Mia. We never imagined the fun adventure would turn into something straight out of a nightmare. Mia's then partner had suggested the trail to us, claiming it was serene and scenic. I had recently relocated to this country, seeking new experiences. As an avid hiker with a love for exploring new trails across different continents, I thought I had seen it all. But nothing could have prepared us for what lay ahead. The hike began like any other, with laughter and admiration for nature's beauty. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, strange markings began to appear on the trees and rocks. These symbols were unusual, geometric shapes mixed with abstract designs, and they seemed deliberately placed. At first, we thought they were just an odd detail of the trail. As we pressed on, the symbols became more frequent and intricate, as if leading us somewhere. They exuded an unsettling energy, like they belonged to an ancient ritual or belief system we couldn't understand. Then we heard chanting. At first, it was faint and almost melodic, drawing us in with curiosity. But as we followed the sound, we stumbled upon something we wish we hadn't. A group of individuals dressed in dark, hooded robes gathered around a blazing fire. There were about 20 of them, their faces obscured by masks or painted symbols. Some held candles. Others stood motionless, all chanting in a language we couldn't recognize. At the center of their circle was a large altar adorned with candles and objects we couldn't identify. Then, something happened that made our blood run cold. A small animal was brought forward and, in a horrifying moment, was sacrificed. The air was thick with tension, and the ritual seemed to intensify. Suddenly, one of the figures noticed us. The chanting stopped. Heads turned, and just like that, our presence became the focus of their attention. Panic overtook us. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us, the adrenaline coursing through our veins, giving us a burst of speed we didn't know we had. The eerie chants had turned into shouts, and the heavy sound of footsteps behind us echoed in the stillness of the forest. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sent waves of terror through us. The darkness felt alive, closing in around us as we desperately searched for a way to escape. Our path twisted unpredictably, and we struggled to navigate through the dense undergrowth. Neither of us spoke, too breathless and terrified to exchange words. Suddenly, through the shadows, we spotted a structure. An old abandoned cabin hidden among the trees. It looked like something out of a horror movie. The roof sagged in places, the wooden walls were weathered and gray, and ivy had begun to reclaim it. But to us, it was salvation. We dashed inside, slamming the rickety door behind us and sliding the old wooden bolt across to lock it. The cabin smelled of mildew and decay. Its windows were small and dusty, and the faint light of the moon barely illuminated the cramped interior. Our breaths came in ragged gasps as we pressed our ears against the door, listening for the sounds of pursuit. Footsteps approached. They were slow and deliberate now, as if the cultists knew they had us cornered. A low murmur of voices reached us through the cracks in the walls, followed by a soft rattle as someone tested the door. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure they could hear it. We knew we had to be ready. Frantically, we searched the cabin for anything we could use as a weapon. Our hands brushed against cobwebs, damp wood, and dusty shelves. Finally, in a dark corner, we found an old axe. It was heavy, its blade rusted and dull, but it gave us a small shred of hope. Mia clutched it tightly while I scanned the room for something else we could use. And then, silence. The voices and footsteps stopped. We stood frozen, afraid to breathe. The stillness was broken by a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a chorus of distant wolf howls. It was eerie, otherworldly, and seemed to come from all directions. The cultists outside shifted nervously. We could hear their shuffling footsteps. For a moment, it seemed like they were retreating. We stayed inside the cabin for what felt like hours, too scared to move, too afraid to look outside. Finally, we mustered the courage to peek through a crack in the door. The clearing outside was empty. The cultists were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. We knew we couldn't stay there forever. The idea of spending the night in that cabin was unbearable. Gathering our strength, we opened the door cautiously and stepped into the moonlit forest. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. We began to make our way back to the trailhead, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. Just as relief started to creep in, thinking we might actually make it out, two figures emerged from the tree line ahead of us. They were dressed in the same dark robes, their faces hidden by masks. They stood still for a moment, watching us like predators sizing up their prey. And then they began to approach. The glint of long knives in their hands caught the moonlight, and a fresh wave of terror surged through me. My legs felt weak, but we turned to run. Just as they closed in, a deafening gunshot shattered the silence. The figures froze. From the distance, a voice shouted, commanding them to stop. Turning back, we saw a figure standing near the edge of the woods, a forest ranger. He held a rifle, and his powerful voice cut through the tension like a knife. The cultists hesitated, exchanged glances, then retreated into the shadows without a word. The ranger waved us over, his expression stern but reassuring. He led us back to safety, keeping his weapon ready in case the cultists returned. When we reached his outpost, we recounted everything that had happened. He immediately reported the incident, and authorities arrived to investigate. Though the police searched the area thoroughly, they found little evidence to support our story. The symbols we had seen earlier were gone, the fire extinguished, and there was no trace of the cultists. It was as if the entire night had been a twisted illusion. Days passed, and just when we thought we could move on, an ominous letter arrived in the mail. There was no return address, and the handwriting was messy and deliberate, as if meant to conceal the writer's identity. The message was chilling. "We know you saw us. You'll never be safe." We immediately reported it to the police, who took the letter as evidence. But without leads, there wasn't much they could do. The fear that someone was watching us lingered, and we both became hyper-vigilant. Over the next few weeks, reports of strange rituals in the area continued, but they eventually died down. Authorities arrested a few individuals for unrelated crimes in the woods, but none of them matched the description of the cultists we'd encountered. The case was eventually closed, leaving us with more questions than answers. I stopped hiking after that. What used to be a source of joy and peace became a source of fear. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and the thought of venturing into the unknown was no longer thrilling. It was terrifying. To this day, I don't know who the cultists were, what their ritual meant, or why they targeted us. But one thing is certain, the woods are no longer a place of peace for me. They're a reminder of how quickly curiosity can turn into danger, and how the unknown is often better left unexplored. Stay safe out there, and trust your instincts. Some things are better left a mystery. When I was 17, I participated in an exchange program from Malaysia. My host family lived in Webster Groves, Missouri, a picturesque suburban town that seemed welcoming enough on the surface. They were a family of 4, a father, a mother, a teenage son, and a daughter just a year younger than me. At first, they seemed warm and kind, almost unnaturally so. I mistook their overzealous hospitality for American friendliness. I didn't realize then how much darker it would become. In the first week, I noticed strange things. Early one morning, I woke up earlier than usual and went to the kitchen, only to find the family gathered around the table in a tight circle. They were murmuring softly, their heads bowed. The moment I stepped into the room, they stopped abruptly and stared at me in silence, their eyes wide and unblinking. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, thinking it might be some odd cultural quirk. By the second week, the atmosphere had shifted. The son outright avoided touching me and once hissed, "You're born of sin." The daughter seemed afraid to be alone with me and was visibly shaken when I addressed her father while looking him in the eye. Curious and increasingly uneasy, I started asking her questions about their behavior. She told me I had residues of the wicked and was destined for hell. She also mentioned something called the cleanse and their daily prayer washes. Over the next week, I started piecing together their practices. They recited the same hymns and Bible verses repeatedly, sometimes in eerie, monotonous tones. Their prayers were more like chants, growing louder and more fervent, sometimes lasting for hours. It became clear I wasn't just staying with a religious family, this was something much darker. The moment of truth came when they took me to their church. It wasn't the kind of church I had imagined. The small, dimly lit space was filled with men and women sitting separately, ribbons of different colors tied around their wrists. The children's faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow. No one spoke to me, and no one met my gaze except the pastor, who seemed to conduct the entire service with me as the focal point. When I looked around, everyone else was staring at me, their eyes wide and intense, as if waiting for something to happen. The chanting, the oppressive atmosphere, the sheer strangeness of it all made me feel like I was in a horror movie. School was on break, so I had no escape. At night, I'd often wake up to find the mother sitting in the dark next to my bed, softly reciting Bible verses. As soon as she realized I was awake, she'd stop, rise silently, and leave the room. I began to dread sleeping. By now, their behavior had escalated. I was punished for minor infractions. No dinner for not praying correctly, locked in my room for hours if I didn't respect their rules, forbidden from drinking anything sweet. They made me wear long-sleeved tops and skirts that covered me completely, even in the heat. They lectured me daily about how sinful I was, how my Oriental upbringing made me blind to the truth, and how I would burn in hell unless I submitted to their beliefs. It was suffocating, but my curiosity kept me grounded. I observed them closely, trying to understand their twisted logic. I think they assumed that, coming from Southeast Asia, I would be gullible and easy to manipulate. They underestimated me. Finally, my chapter coordinator came for a visit. I made sure to meet her outside, away from the house, and poured out everything that had happened. Her face grew increasingly alarmed as I spoke. Without hesitation, she told me to pack my essentials and leave with her immediately. We returned an hour later with representatives from the exchange program. When we arrived, the family was in the backyard, burning my belongings. Flames consumed my clothes, my books, even small trinkets I had brought from home. They called it a purification ritual for the sinful non-believer. I panicked, thinking my passport and other important documents might have been destroyed, but luckily, they were untouched. The family didn't protest as the representatives confronted them, but their expressions were eerie, smiling yet hostile, as if they believed they were righteous in their actions. It chilled me to my core. I was placed with a new host family immediately. They were kind and understanding, helping me rebuild my confidence after the ordeal. To this day, the memory of that month haunts me. It wasn't just the bizarre rituals or the constant scrutiny. It was the way they had dehumanized me, stripping me of my identity in their effort to convert me to their beliefs. The experience made me realize the thin line between faith and fanaticism, and how dangerous it can be to fall into the hands of those who blur that line. It was Derek's idea, as always. He had a knack for pulling us into adventures, his charm making it impossible to say no. "Picture it," he said, spreading his arms wide as if unveiling the perfect getaway. "An island paradise, no crowds, no distractions, just us and nature." The group loved the idea. Jordan and Maya were all in from the start, and Emily, ever the voice of reason, caved after a few minutes of Derek's coaxing. That left me. I was hesitant. Maybe it was because I'd never really traveled, or because my parents' strict rules growing up had left me with a cautious streak. Still, they wore me down. Derek always did. "It's just for a few days, Taylor," Emily had said, her tone soothing. "You'll have fun, I promise." I let myself believe her. The island was more remote than I expected. After a long ferry ride, we arrived at a tiny dock surrounded by dense jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sound was the distant crash of waves. The cabin was perched on a cliff, with a stunning view of the ocean. It looked old, but solid, its wooden walls weathered by years of salt air. Inside, it was cozy enough. Basic, but with just enough charm to make me feel like I'd stepped into a postcard. That first day was everything Derek had promised. We swam in the turquoise water, explored hidden coves, and basked in the sun until our skin glowed. By evening, we were sitting around a fire pit outside the cabin, laughing and sharing stories. Still, something about the island felt off. At first, I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. The jungle seemed too quiet, the shadows too deep. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement in the trees, but when I looked closer, there was nothing there. "You okay?" Maya asked, nudging me. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." But as the night went on, the uneasy feeling grew. I woke up suddenly, my chest tight. The cabin was dark, the faint sound of waves crashing in the distance. For a moment, I thought I'd had a nightmare, but as I lay there, listening, I heard it. A low, rhythmic chanting, coming from somewhere outside. I sat up, my heart racing. The sound was distant, almost like a breeze carrying whispers through the jungle. My friends' rooms were dark, their doors closed. I called out softly, "Derek? Emily?" But no one answered. Then I noticed the front door. It was slightly ajar, the humid night air spilling into the cabin. I hesitated, but the chanting was growing louder. I stepped outside, and that's when I saw the glow of firelight through the trees. My pulse quickened. "Derek?" I called again, louder this time. Still no response. Against my better judgment, I followed the light. The path was uneven, the jungle pressing in on all sides. The chanting grew louder with every step, the words unintelligible but strangely rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The firelight grew brighter as I pushed through the underbrush until I finally reached a clearing and froze. There was a fire in the center, and around it stood a circle of people dressed in dark robes. Their faces were hidden by hoods, their chanting rising and falling in an eerie, unnatural cadence. At first, I thought I was looking at strangers, but then I saw them. Derek, Jordan, Maya, and Emily stood near the fire, their faces calm, almost serene. They weren't wearing robes, but they were chanting along with the others, their voices blending into the strange rhythm. I felt like the ground had dropped out from under me. I took a step back, panic clawing at my chest. That's when I saw the altar. It was a massive slab of stone, covered in strange carvings that seemed to writhe in the firelight. Dark stains marred its surface, and the air around it felt heavy, oppressive. I didn't realize I'd stepped on a branch until it snapped under my foot. The sound echoed through the clearing like a gunshot. The chanting stopped. Slowly, heads turned toward me, locked onto mine, and Derek smiled, a slow, chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Taylor," he said, his voice light, almost amused. "You're awake. Good. Come join us." My stomach twisted. What? What is this? Maya took a step closer, her expression soft, almost pitying. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said. "But it's okay. Everything's going to be fine. Stay back," I said, my voice shaking. They didn't stop. "You're special, Taylor," Derek said. "You've always been different. That's why we brought you here." "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my hands trembling. "You're the sacrifice," Emily said, her voice soft, reverent. My blood turned to ice. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush. The branches clawing at my face and arms. I could hear the others calling out, their voices disturbingly calm despite my escape. "Taylor," Derek called, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. "You can't run from this. It's your destiny." I didn't look back. When I finally burst out onto the beach, the ferry was waiting. The captain saw me and started the engine as I sprinted toward the boat, my lungs burning. "Help!" I screamed, waving frantically. I glanced back and saw Derek, Jordan, Maya, and Emily emerging from the trees. They didn't shout or run after me. They just stood there, watching, their faces calm but their eyes dark with promise. I leapt onto the ferry, gasping for breath. "Don't let them on," I begged the captain. He nodded and pushed the throttle, the boat pulling away from the island. As the shoreline faded into the distance, I collapsed onto the deck, trembling. Even now, I can't escape the memory. I wake up hearing their chanting, seeing the altar, feeling their hands pulling me toward it. The island is still out there, and they're waiting for me to come back. I never thought I'd be telling this story. Even now, it feels surreal to look back on it. I was one of the survivors of the Jonestown tragedy, the mass loss of life that affected hundreds of people, and it still haunts me every single day. My name is Carla Mitchell, and I was one of those who got swept up in the promises of Jim Jones and his People's Temple. I didn't see it coming. At first, it all seemed so hopeful. I was living in San Francisco in the mid-1970s, just like many others looking for meaning in a world that felt increasingly unstable. There was so much division in the U.S., with politics tearing the country apart, and the Vietnam War still leaving its scars. The idea of a community that stood for social justice, equality, and a sense of family was intoxicating. Jim Jones promised all of that. He had a way with words, a kind of magnetic presence. He spoke about unity, about creating a better world, about rejecting the materialism of society and focusing on love and equality. It felt like a dream I couldn't resist. I joined the People's Temple in San Francisco, and in the beginning, it was everything I thought I needed. The temple was a place where I felt accepted, where I found people who were fighting for the same ideals as I was. We worked together, sang together, and helped each other through the struggles of life. Jim Jones, the man who built all of this, seemed like a father figure. He listened to us, made us feel heard, and made me believe that we could create something truly special. But, as with any story that ends in horror, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. As time passed, I noticed little things. The rules became stricter. Jim became more erratic. He started isolating us from the outside world. We couldn't watch the news or read newspapers. He began telling us that everyone outside the temple was the enemy, that the government, the media, the world itself was out to destroy us. He painted a picture of constant persecution. Slowly, the sense of community that once felt so warm and safe started to feel more like a prison. Then came the move to Jonestown. The dream of creating a self-sustaining community deep in the jungles of Guyana sounded like the next logical step in Jim's vision. A place where we could escape the corruptions of the outside world, where we could live in peace, free from the distractions of modern life. I thought I was going to help build something beautiful. I thought we would be happy there. But the moment we stepped foot in Jonestown, everything changed. The land was beautiful in its own way, but there was something unsettling about it. It was hot, isolated, and incredibly difficult to live in. The work was constant, building the infrastructure, farming, trying to make everything self-sufficient. We didn't have much, but we were told it would be worth it. "This is our paradise," Jim would say. But that paradise quicker. Jim's behavior got worse over time. He would rant for hours in his speeches, and the things he said became more erratic, more paranoid. He started to demand absolute loyalty from everyone. Anyone who dared question him was punished, ostracized, or, worse, disappeared. The tension in the air was thick. I knew something wasn't right, but the thought of leaving, of abandoning everything I had built with the temple, seemed impossible. But then came the day I realized I had to escape. It was the day they brought out the poisoned drink. It's hard to describe the feelings I had that day. Jim had gathered everyone in the central area of the compound, and he started talking about revolutionary sacrifice. He said that we had to show the world that we were committed to our cause, our commitment to his vision. And the way he spoke about it, the way he justified it, made it sound so final, so absolute. He made it seem like if we didn't do this, we were betraying everything we had worked for. I had seen people speak out, try to resist before, and each time, something terrible happened to them. They disappeared. Their voices, once loud with hope, were silenced. I knew this was different. This time, there was no way out, no easy escape. It wasn't just about the fear of leaving. It was the reality that anyone who didn't comply wouldn't survive. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't drink the poison. I couldn't leave my life in the hands of a man who had manipulated us all for so long. I had to run. I don't even remember how I got away. I just remember the panic, the terror, the sounds of people crying, the shouts of others begging for their lives, the cold realization that this was it. This was the end for so many. Somehow, I found a way out. I ran through the jungle, the dense trees and thick brush making it almost impossible to see where I was going. My heart was racing, my body was exhausted, and I knew there was a chance someone would catch me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let it end like that. I ran for hours, not knowing if I was going in the right direction, just hoping that somewhere someone would help me. I finally collapsed. I don't know how long I lay there, hours, maybe even a day, but when I woke up, I was alone. The jungle was quiet. I didn't hear the sounds of the compound anymore, the chants, the orders. I was free. But the freedom felt like a weight on my chest. The guilt, the grief, the pain of leaving behind everyone I had once considered family, it all came flooding back. Eventually, I made it to a place where I could reach the outside world. But even when I finally got to a phone, I couldn't believe it. The news was everywhere. Jonestown was no more. Hundreds of people, including children, were gone. The people I had called friends, the people I had worked beside, they were dead. The world would never know the full scope of what had happened in that jungle. But I did. I came back to the States, but I was different. How could I not be? I had lived through something unimaginable, and I had lost so much. The years that followed were a blur of therapy, support groups, and trying to put together the pieces of my life. I couldn't trust people. I couldn't trust myself. The guilt ate at me every day. Why had I survived? Why had they not? But over time, I found a way to heal. It wasn't easy. It still isn't. But I dedicated my life to helping others, survivors, people who had gone through similar things, anyone who needed to hear that they weren't alone. I speak now, when I can, to make sure that what happened in Jonestown is never forgotten. And though I will never forget the people I lost there, I keep moving forward. Because the most important lesson I've learned is that even in the darkest moments, there is a way to survive. I use someone I can't even recognize now. Back then, I was deep in it. The darkness, the rituals, the secrecy. It felt like a lifetime ago, but it wasn't. It was just a few months. A few months that have stained my soul forever. I wasn't born evil, I didn't seek it out, but somewhere along the way, I got caught. I didn't see it happening at first. You never do you? It's like slowly sinking into a pool of tar, and by the time you realize you're drowning, it's too late to escape. I had my reasons for joining. I was lost. I was looking for purpose, for meaning in a world that seemed so hollow. The cult promised something beyond the mundane, something powerful, something transcendent. At first, it was easy to ignore the whispers, the rumors about what they actually did behind closed doors. I was new, naive, desperate for a place to belong. And they welcomed me in. They promised me power, the kind of power that came with obedience, with sacrifice. The first ritual was subtle. Just a few candles, a chant, an offering. It was almost laughable if you hadn't seen what came after. I was naive then, not realizing that the true horror wasn't in the ritual itself, but in what the cult made you willing to do. They said it was for the greater good, for the enlightenment of the soul. We called it the binding, but it was a lie. It was a trap. It was when they tied your soul to their will, a permanent link that would never let go. We didn't start with anything too extreme. We were told we were cleansing the world, ridding it of corruption. And the first blood we spilled, it felt justified somehow. It was always framed in terms of purification. They'd tell all of us, that the innocent ones we hurt, those we sacrificed, were the corrupt ones, the ones holding us all back. In the beginning, I didn't see it. I didn't see how easily we were manipulated, how slowly they made us numb. The longer I saw violent the rituals became, I became numb to it all. Their leader, the one they called the Shrouded One, would stand in the center, his black robes flowing like smoke around him. His voice was hypnotic, the way it reverberated in your chest, making your heart race in anticipation. He promised us power, enlightenment, immortality if we followed his path. But the rituals, the sacrifices, they were becoming more elaborate, more horrific. They had us carve symbols into the skin of the living, chanting words I couldn't understand. At first, I thought evil, an act for a higher cause, but the moment I saw the terrified and pleading knife was raised, that's when everything began to crack. That night in sleep, I lay in my cot, staring at the ceiling, hearing the echoes of the child's cries in my mind. I didn't want to think about it, but I couldn't help myself. I had been complicit. I had participated. My hands had been covered in that innocent blood, just like everyone else's, and no amount of chanting could erase what I had done. No amount of power could bring that child back. I couldn't stand it anymore, but leaving, trying to, it wasn't easy. The cult doesn't just let you go. It binds you, traps you. It's not just loyalty they demand, it's a piece of your soul. They made sure we couldn't leave, had us marked, each of us branded with their symbol. A symbol that twisted and burned into my skin like it was part of me, part of my very being. I remember the night I decided to leave. We were preparing for the most elaborate ritual yet. A blood moon, they called it. A rare event that supposedly opened the gates to another realm. They spoke of summoning gods, of bending the very fabric to our will. But when I looked into the eyes of the person lying on the altar, another victim, a stranger who had been lured in under the protection, it was no different from the others. We were all just pawns in a game that didn't care who lived or died, and that realization was like a knife in my chest. I had to escape. I had to run, no matter the cost. The night I left, I thought I could just slip away unnoticed, but I was wrong. They knew. They always know. The Shrouded One's eyes were like fire when he saw me. "You can never leave," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You belong to us. You always will." But I ran. I ran until my breath came in ragged gasps. I didn't stop, not even when I heard the distant howls, the chants in the night that seemed to call my name. I made it to the outskirts of the town, to the place where they couldn't reach me. But the damage had already been done. The memories haunted me, the faces those I'd hurt, the screams of the innocent that echoed in my ears. Every night I relived the child, the blood, the rituals. I couldn't wash it off. I couldn't forget. The mark on my skin, the symbol they branded me with, it's still there. A constant reminder monster I once was. And it will never fade. I wish I could say I came out of it unscathed. I wish I could say that leaving them was the end of it, but it's not. Every night the dreams come. The cult doesn't let go. I hear the chants, see the blood. I see their faces, those who are still trapped in the web they wove, and it fills me with guilt. I left, but I didn't stop them. I couldn't stop them. And now I live with the consequences of my actions. Every minute is a reminder of what I did, of what I was. I used to think I could outrun my past, but the truth is, no matter how far I go, I'll always carry it with me. The weight of the blood on my hands, the souls I helped destroy, the lives I helped ruin, it will never leave me. I can never go back. I can never undo what I did. All I can do is try to make amends even possible, and hope that somehow, in the end, I'll be able to forgive myself. But I don't think I will. Because when you cross a line like I did, there's no going back. And the cult is there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next person they can twist and warp. The rain slicked the pavement under my feet as I stood outside the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The cold bit through my jacket, but I barely felt it. My mind was consumed by the task at hand. I was about to infiltrate one of the most secretive and dangerous cults known to exist, the Children of the Veil. For months, I had heard whispers about them. Rituals in the dead of night, cryptic symbols etched into walls, and people who disappeared without a trace. Their name kept surfacing in connection with missing persons cases that law enforcement conveniently dismissed as unrelated. It wasn't unrelated. I knew it wasn't. One of those missing persons was my brother Sam. The invitation I held in my hand was my golden ticket. It had taken weeks of false identities, staged encounters, and carefully planted rumors to convince one of their members to recommend me. The card was simple, a black rectangle with a crimson symbol embossed in its center, the mark of the veil. The instructions were on the back, written in an archaic script I had painstakingly learned to read. I took a deep breath, pushed the heavy metal door open, and stepped inside. My footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and something faintly metallic. Dim red light area, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. A hooded figure stood at the far end of the room, motionless. "You're late," the figure said, the voice low and distorted, as though masked by some device. "Traffic," I replied, keeping my tone even. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The figure stepped closer, and I could make out the intricate patterns embroidered on their black robe. They inspected me for a moment before nodding. "Follow me." I did as I was told, trailing the figure through a maze of corridors that seemed to spiral deeper and deeper underground. The walls were covered in strange symbols and murals depicting scenes I could barely comprehend. Hooded figures kneeling before a glowing portal, shadowy shapes emerging from the darkness, eyes, hundreds of them from every corner. Finally, we entered a large chamber filled with people, all dressed in similar robes. They stood in concentric circles around a raised platform in the center. On the platform was a massive stone altar, its surface stained dark. Candles flickered around the room, their flames casting a wavering light that seemed to make the symbols on the walls writhe. "Brothers and sisters," a voice boomed from the platform. I turned my attention to the figure. Their robe was more elaborate than the others, adorned with gold and crimson embroidery. "Tonight, we welcome a new seeker into our fold," every head turned to me. I fought the urge to take a step back. "Step forward," the leader commanded. I moved to the center of the room, acutely aware of every eye on me. The leader gestured to the altar. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before complying. My knees hit the cold stone, and I placed my hands on the altar as instructed. The leader began to chant, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. The others joined in, their voices creating a dissonant harmony that seemed to vibrate through the very air. As the chant reached a crescendo, I felt a sharp pain in my palm. I looked down to see a blade slicing across my skin, wielded by the leader. Blood pooled on the altar and the room seemed to darken. The chanting grew louder, almost deafening. Shadows moved unnaturally, and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly. And then, silence. Complete and utter silence. The leader spoke again, their voice cutting through the stillness. "You have shed your blood for the veil. Now, you must prove your loyalty." A door opened on the far side of the chamber, revealing another hooded figure dragging a bound and gagged man into the room. My stomach twisted. The man's eyes were wide with terror, and his muffled cries echoed in the silence. "He is an outsider," the leader said. "A threat to our purpose. Eliminate him." A knife was placed in my hand. My mind raced. This was the test. If I refused, my cover would be blown, and I'd likely share the man's fate. But if I went through with it, could I ever live with myself? I took a step toward the man, my hand trembling. His eyes locked onto mine, pleading. I hesitated, the weight of the knife feeling unbearable. "Do it," the leader hissed. The room seemed to close in around me. The pressure was suffocating. I made my decision. In one swift motion, I turned and drove the knife into the leader's chest. Gasps and cries erupted. Chaos and bound man and bolted for behind me, echoed as the cultists gave. Somehow, and into the night, was racing through my veins. Saved was still shaking to choke out a "thank you." We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of the city streets. I turned to him, breathing heavily. "Do you know anything about my brother? Sam, he's missing." The man's eyes widened. "Sam, they took him. But he's alive. I've seen him." Relief and determination surged through me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The children of the Vale had taken my brother, and now they would pay. They say the worst betrayals come from those closest to you. I never truly understood that until the day I discovered who my husband really was. For years, I had been living in a lie so intricate, so meticulously woven, that it had become the fabric of my reality. But the threads unraveled quickly when the truth surfaced, leaving me gasping for air in a world that suddenly felt foreign. It all started on a humid Thursday evening. through dusty boxes filled with old photo albums and forgotten trinkets. I'd always known Peter was a private man, mysterious even. But in the 11 years we'd been married, he'd never given me a reason to doubt him. We were happy, or so I thought. One of the boxes caught my eye. It was tucked away in the farthest corner, covered in cobwebs, and I didn't recognize Blackwood. I sent my curiosity. Peter had never mentioned an Elias Blackwood, and the name felt too sure. With a head, I opened the box. Inside, I found documents, photographs, and letters that painted a chilling picture. There were old black and white photos, except he wasn't Peter. He looked younger, his hair styled differently, but it was undoubtedly him. In some of the photos, he stood surrounded by men and women dressed in robes, their faces shrouded by hoods. In others, he was standing on a podium, speaking to crowds of people who's in rapturous devotion. Then there were the letters, signed Alias, or E.B., named Brother Samuel. As I read, my stomach churned. The letters spoke of unity and purity, the tainted, and restoring the true order. It didn't gather the horrifying truth. It was the leader of a violent... I did until one of the letters sling hands. Back on my heel, a pile of evidence, my mind racing. How could I not have known? How could I have shared my life with someone treated? Peter flashed through his charm, his way he always knew how, but now felt tainted, slick spreading across water. Rest of the evening, of that box, I read the claim. Blackwood was this. My husband had we met, leader of a group called a racial supremacy of violence and the beliefs. Documents that after a federal go, Blackwood had vanished, to himself as the assuming man who had slept that night. By morning, to confront him, Peter came home from work for him in the living. The box sat between us, spread out like M. I demanded, with anger, and Peter froze. Eyes darted and back to me. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he let out a slow breath and sank into the armchair across from me. I was going to tell you, he said finally, his voice calm, almost detached. Someday. Someday, I repeated, my voice rising. You are going to tell me someday that you led a racist cult? That you've been living a lie our entire marriage? Who are you, Peter? Or should I call you Elias? His expression darkened. I'm the same man you married, Caroline. The same man who loves you. Don't you dare, I snapped, my hands clenched into fists. Don't you dare say you love me. You don't even know what love is. For the first time, a flicker of something resembling guilt crossed his face. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. It's not as simple as you think, he said. The ascendants were misguided. I've changed. I left that life behind. You left it behind? I gestured to the box. Then why do you still have this? Why keep the photos, the letters? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. Caroline, you have to understand. Everything I did back then, I thought I was doing for the right reasons. I thought I was protecting something important, but I see things differently